research and free thinking. I've been interviewing a lot of guests of late who've been researching the supernatural, paranormal, extraterrestrial presence that is there on the planet and has been there on the planet for a very long time. And for like a lot of my audience is familiar with the fact that I myself got into conspiracy research and looking into these subjects because of a bad breakup that I had in college. So, funnily enough, it's actually like relationships that have been my biggest catalyst to push me towards seeking the truth, because the pain that has come with the dissolution of those relationships has always made me look beyond the materialistic normal paradigm and think deeper in terms of the spiritual aspects of whatever's going on and the purpose of life and the meaning of life and all of that. So I interviewed Bernard recently. I interviewed Tom Montauk, and here's another person who I deeply respect a lot, whose work has helped me a lot in my own awakening journey over the years. So Evie, welcome to the show. How are you doing? So great to have you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a great intro. I know both those individuals, Bernard and Tom Montauk, for actually many years. We actually did a group, a video discussion some years ago on the alien love bite, as well as hyperdimensional interference factors. And we put together a lot of our own experiences and research to basically give credence to and clarity to this type of experience that I think many people who've had some kind of interest in the UFO paranormal field, now they're calling it UAP, but extraterrestrials and all that kind of stuff have had experiences that defy the normal or what was, scientific at the time. So I believe that there's a greater influence in our lives that really goes beyond just sightings of craft or paranormal experiences or people who've had abductions. They have a lot more than just what's known as what they call the hybrid breeding program, or they get taken in a craft or medical experimentation of some sort, and then they're all done. But in reality, people who've had experiences throughout their life have a lot more in-depth experiences going on that have influenced them, that it's not always talked about publicly, at least many years ago in the research, I guess, communities. So that was why I was motivated to write my book, the first book called The Love Bite, about basically alien interference in human love relationships. Of the people who first reported it to me were people who've already knew that they had some kind of alien or ET visitation, abductions in their life history and their family history, for the most part. And then they realized that there was some kind of heavy orchestration being set up with another partner. The other partner may or may not be a classic alien abductee or experiencer. Sometimes they're just used for the purpose of the relationship, and they're not like a classic, quote, abductee or MyLab. And that's the term that I use. Although nowadays, the I think there's a peer pressure component that when people have these experiences, they don't want to be called something that implies that they're a victim or they're powerless in the experience, like, quote, abductee, or somebody who's been taken beyond their will, usually physically, by some other force or beings. But in reality, it's usually they usually don't give consent, and it's something that just happens to them. And they experience it sometimes physically and sometimes out of the body or within a weird lucid dream state, and they're not even sure. But regardless, it's something that tends to happen to people with these histories without their consent or knowledge. They just kind of grew up with it. So I use the term abductee like the old school researchers, simply because if there's a component of not giving consent or a lack of awareness of the extent of what these beings are actually doing to them, I don't think that they're fully in control of what their agenda is with these people. And I think people's psychology in general want to believe that they're in control, that there's nothing to fear, that these beings must be good. And if they were bad, well, they would have taken over the planet anyway, and different kinds of logical reasoning, which really doesn't hold up to the reality, if you ask me. So I guess I could start off with actually confirming that my researcher mentor was the late Barbara Bartholic. And she was the one who was actually Dr. Carla Turner's mentor and hypnotherapist and co researcher in a lot of Dr. Carla Turner's research years ago, that was probably back in the 90s. And Dr. Carla Turner was, I believe that she was killed with a rapid cancer. And this happens to some UFO researchers when they get a little bit too close to what I believe is maybe some of the darker elements that show that there might be evidence that connects humans with certain alien groups and certain levels of influence, manipulation, or control that bespeaks that we really don't have a handle on this. And I think there's groups of humans who don't want this out. And we've come to find out that this indeed is the case, that there are some, quote, alien groups who have been working with, human groups, whether it's military or government or secret societies, that this has been going on actually for a very long time. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why in the current disclosure movement, which has really been going on for 20 something years, right? Dr. Stephen Greer was the one who really brought this topic up to more popularity with that term disclosure. And so now they're finally coming out with this UAP and crash retrievals and evidence by high level military, blah blah blah. But this has been going on for decades. There's nothing new about it. And I think that when they ever do something official, it's never going to be the whole ball of wax,
Hmm.
or it's going to be controlled information or what they can get away with, and then try to control the narrative and then control people's reactions to it so they can steer it in a direction that's really beneficial for whoever are the large control groups of, whether it's governments or society or whatever. So I think that the private researchers probably have a better handle on the whole the whole ballpark. I don't know what term to use, but there's so much more going on that is really not disclosed. And that's what I found out with, quote, the alien love bite, which sounds absolutely nuts. And the only reason why we use that term was that somebody years ago used that term, alien love bite, when they knew that they were having some kind of love romance attraction with another person that the aliens were basically like setting them up with or interfering in some way in their relationships on some other deeper level of influence. And then it was like usually would manifest as a type of love obsession that was really beyond the norm, that included a lot of paranormal, supernatural, psychic phenomena like synchronicities and omens, and like the super wow, this is beyond a love obsession. This is like, divine providence. It feels like your twin flame or your soulmate, and you get confirmations in your dreams or synchronistic events as if they're manipulating reality itself to cause us to want to believe and really fall into this obsession and this relationship play out. So that's what I found, and I wrote about it in my book, The Love Bite, and many case histories. So if there's anywhere you want to like kind of go to, I don't want to keep
Yeah,
rattling off those
I have
specific.
I have a lot of ideas about how I want to direct the conversation. So, firstly, I did watch your roundtable with Montauk, Carissa Conti, Bernard, and a lot of other people, and that was very insightful for me as well because you guys really went into detail about differentiating between like the traits of someone who's been interfered with by aliens or someone who's been interfered with by more demonic entities, as well as a lot of people. I mean, with you guys making this knowledge, pretty famous and more well known to people, a lot of people also try to shove their normal like psychological issues in relationships and blame it on aliens when there isn't
Yes.
really interference going on. So I wanted to go into all of that step by step. Maybe let's just start with your own experience with respect to what got you into this. Like what really
Okay.
drew you to start researching this phenomena? Because from like my understanding of your background, you were scientifically oriented earlier. I
Yeah.
think you have a PhD as well, and then you got into this subject, and your field of expertise involves anomalous trauma, which is not just like alien abductions, but it
Yeah.
also like goes into satanic ritual abuse and
Yeah.
all of these other dark evil kind of things that a lot of people experience in our world. So do you want to tell people about your personal experience with respect to how you got into this first, and then we can
Yeah.
go ahead from there?
Yeah, good question. And yes, I've had my own experiences related to the alien encounter, abduction, influence, sightings throughout my family history since a young child, for sure. And I never had full recall of all the events that occurred, and that really frustrated me for many years. And I didn't really come to understand what it really was until I actually started reading. I think it was some of the early Bud Hopkins work that really kind of woke me up to, oh, my experience was very much like what he wrote about. And I thought they were always maybe like dreams or, these beings that would interact with our dreams. But I didn't think I really had physical events until I did more investigating. And that actually required a lot of psychological recovery work with respect to trauma and my own family of origin, and that really took many years to just kind of unpack what all this was and what it meant. But to, I guess, make it more clearly succinct, is that in my family line, my father worked for Lockheed Aerospace Corporation, which is a major defense contracted military industrial complex. They make weapons, right? And so he actually had a lot of books that he was interested in the aerial phenomena of UFOs because they tracked, aerial craft that sometimes were not ours as part of a job, actually. So he actually knew and had to keep a lot of this stuff secret because of his security clearance. Like in hindsight, I realize that now. So, he did have some books laying around and we were always interested, but my perspective was in the beginning is I thought, oh, they were all like good ETs, from the 50s contactee material, and thinking that they were good ones who were here to help us and that's who they were. But then when I discovered other people having experiences, and the researchers like Bud Hopkins had come out and many others who, showed that there's a little bit something different going on where they're, you're taking you, examining you medically, taking the eggs and sperm, or doing all kinds of like weird things that you don't even know until you start having these dream fragments and stuff come up. So it was kind of scary for me. So anyway, to go forward, my career, I actually became a biochemist and worked in the biochemistry biotech field for about 7 years. Before that, I was a pharmacy tech to get myself through college. And I was always interested, but actually, I got poisoned on one of my jobs. And that made me decide that if I want to have a child, I'm going to just change my career. I think I'm more interested in people. So I studied Oriental medicine for about a year and then
Wait,
decided
when
that I
when you
wanted
say
to.
that you were poisoned, do you mean intentionally
Oh,
or
yeah.
just as a nature of the job
Um,
itself?
That remains to be seen. It was
Okay.
probably accidental based on the biohazards that I was working with, which included ricin toxin, which is like
Okay.
bad.
Yeah.
But nobody else in the lab got poisoned like I did, and I had weird medical results that the company president was wanted to hide from me, so I didn't find out that I was actually being poisoned. And so, I ended up going to the doctor and doing a lot of prayer, and actually my prayers were answered. We moved to another city, had another opportunity. So I just got out of that town, got out of that job, and then started another biochem job in San Diego County. And that was fine. I didn't get poisoned there. But I knew that if I wanted to have a child, I wanted to clear my system from any potential biohazards, because it's very dangerous to work in the biotech field. You're exposed to all kinds of things. So I changed my career to counseling psychology, and the focus that I wanted to do. My college, it was a University for Humanistic Studies out of Del Mar, which is North County, San Diego. And so my degree was based on marriage and family and relationship counseling. But as a counselor, I got to learn more about, family system dynamics, and mostly about relationship dynamics and trauma and addictions. So with that, I decided to go for several hypnotherapy trainings and certifications so that I could work specifically with people who've had alien abductions and some of the weird woo-woo stuff that at the time most psychologists and psychiatrists, the medical people, wouldn't really acknowledge that. They would misdiagnose it, call you crazy, try to medicate you. So there's a whole population of people who were not diagnosed correctly or were never able to get the help they needed. So that's why I got into this field, so that I could not only research it but help others and really understand my own life. So that's how it started. And then it was
And
actually
it's very
accidental.
interesting to see a lot of people who've dealt with abductions face like similar kind of ostracization and demonization as the victims of mind control. Like I'm going to be interviewing Kathy O'Brien in 2 days, and I was just reading a book. So, she went through
Yeah.
something similar with Mark Phillips when he was trying to like get her back on her path with respect to how much lack of support there is and how much lack of
Yes.
acknowledgement there is of the pain and the evil that these people have to go through. So yeah.
Yes. In fact, I remember her. I also remember Susan Ford, who wrote "Thanks for the Memories," and there
Yeah.
was many who came out, and I think a lot of this stuff was starting to be revealed more in the '90s and forward. More and more people came out about, MK Ultra and satanic ritual abuse, or certain elite family bloodlines that did these things to their people and then used them as operatives under mind control to carry out a multitude of jobs and operations and agendas. So at some point, now this is where Dr. Carla Turner's work came in, and that I always suspected, but when we had private abductee support groups, which I started in, I guess it was in Fallbrook, which is San Diego County, California. And I wanted to do this so I could learn about it. And we would have these groups and start talking about the weird experiences we had with mostly alien abductions, the encounters, the weird dreams, and then the weird military component that seemed to be involved with some of our memories or some of the connections that showed there was a connection with some military secret groups or government or secret elite humans who are working with aliens. So that got started with Dr. Carla Turner's work and Barbara Bartholick, and myself and James Bartley started the group along with a colleague that I went to school with, where we really just got together and just talked about our experiences. And then that's how we discovered there was a little bit more going on than what was being let out in the research quote UFO community. And the whole it always seemed to be that because this whole alien phenomena is just weird. In the old days, they used to call it, oh, there's this high strangeness going on in this particular UFO encounter, and they try to make it all scientific and investigate it, like with MUFON. But in reality, there's just so much weird shit going on. Okay, it's hard to make it a simple scientific investigation when these beings or whatever technologies that they have can manipulate our consciousness, our perception, take us in and out of time, in and out of space, invade our dreams, manipulate our relationships, engineer families to get married, to have kids. I mean, when you realize the level of influence, it goes beyond, the regular science that we think we know, and it puts it into the realm of spirituality and how is reality really working here.
Mm.
So I always thought that in the early days, even now, if you listen to some of the official disclosure and even the MUFON researchers and presentations, they're going to want to keep it on the scientific aerial phenomena. What are these craft? Who are these people? Are they, people who are credible, military people, making disclosure testimonies? So they always try to limit it to their idea of what science is and what credibility is. But in reality, they're taking out a lot of information that they've always tried to keep a lid on. And I know this for a fact about the alien love bite with MUFON in particular. So, back in 1999, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. We're in India right now, right? Your show
Yeah.
back in 1999. This is a long time ago. Okay, the book, and you probably have this in your links, but this is the original book,
Yeah, I have it as well.
The Love Bite, and actually, I was gonna publish it in 1999 in the summer, but it was delayed until the following year. But I believe, asked by I think it was Walt Andrus. who is the was the state MUFON director in 1999 out of Washington D.C. Or the conference that they had was in Washington D.C. So this was like considered like, whoa, you mean they want someone like me to present about an alien love bite at a MUFON conference in D.C.? Like, whoa, that's kind of like weird. And I remember when I was there, the late Dr. Stanton Friedman, who's like a PhD physicist who's been a ufologist for years with a lot of really good research. He was there along with many others presenting. And I remember when I had a binder of research where I have photos and pictures with the big picture of the alien with the bow and arrow, and he looked at it and he smirked and said, "That's not science." And I said, "Well, but it's true." And I so, I presented anyway. But what I found out later, and this is an example of how they want to just shove out certain aspects of the quote ET whatever from the public opinion of these, credible groups like MUFON. Later, it was after 1999 when the next section director took over that position. I think it's an international position. They were told, and I found this out. I won't mention names now because I don't know if I have permission. But basically, that head honcho of MUFON was basically told all the other people there's going to be no presentations, and don't talk about the alien love bite. That's basically, you just don't talk about it. In other words, I've been blackballed since frickin' the year 2000, over what, 23 years ago? They still don't want to talk about it. They still don't want to acknowledge it, even if the people who are the head of that section director were abductees in an alien love bite scenario. Okay. And this goes back, I'm on a rant. Okay. I go on rants. I want to make a point that these things happen to even the best of us, the worst of us, and everybody in between, including large governmental international figures in politics. Okay. This happens to many people and can't necessarily stop it. They just find out along the way that they've had these encounters and these beings have been, kind of influencing their dreams or taking them in and out of time. And they, put together with these partners. And you find out later, like the level of influence and manipulation or being directed by certain groups on how humanity will evolve for all I know. But there's many who they just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it. They think it's stupid, weird, crazy ass stuff when you talk about alien love bite. But really, they do put people together. They do observe and, tweak the knobs here and there with whatever they want to do. And this has been going on for years, if not thousands of years, if you ask me.
Yeah,
So
I
I'll
mean,
just pause for a
it's
second and yeah.
maybe we could speculate as to why they're really doing it, but as far as the fact that they're doing it is pretty clear, because even in Montauk's work, like when I was reading his work, it becomes very apparent that a lot of the interference due to aliens in our lives is actually spiritual warfare in order to harvest our like negative louche energy. And the entire mainstream UFO disclosure field, and even a lot of people who are working in that field, as you rightly said, they're trying to keep it at something that's very, out there. It's like craft
Yeah.
out there and aliens are out there, but most of the interference is actually happening on a psychic level, as you say, in our dreams. And they understand our mindset and our weaknesses, and they're constantly scanning that and setting us up to basically get into situations where they will extract our energy from us and weaken us over time, so that they can eventually destroy us if we give in to that. So I really resonate with your rant, and like I would love it if you can go on many in the show. But maybe
Yeah.
like we can start with just going through some of the cases that you've referenced in your book. I would really love it if you could walk the viewers through Ted Rice's case, because that's a book that
Oh,
I
yeah,
read
yeah.
before I read yours, Masquerade of Angels. And
Oh, yeah. Okay.
funnily enough, like after reading that book, it's for the first time in my life that I got sleep paralysis, because I was like pretty freaked out about what I read.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, maybe you can just walk us through Ted Rice's case, because that'll
Oh,
really
yeah.
give people insight as to how alien beings can really set people up from childhood to get into these kind of situations.
Yeah. The Ted Rice case, I actually re summarized it in my Love Bite book with permission by Ted Rice himself. And he was a client of Barbara Bartholic and I believe Dr. Carla Turner's research. But Barbara Bartholic actually did all the regressions and investigations over years before he decided to share his story. It was actually in the Masquerade of Angels, like you mentioned. And then because his case was such, see, Barbara Bartholic was so excellent in all the things that she was able to discover and get people to reveal with her work. And she used to work with Dr. Jacques Vallée even before she, I think, became a hypnotherapist. And so she had connections and understandings of this phenomena that, went many years back. So in Ted Rice's case, was a classic alien abductee from childhood. And it probably went in his family history, certainly at least his grandmother, because she was involved in an abduction that he recalled, later. So it was physical for him. And he believes, and even in his case, there was a cloning switching out procedure, which is not something that people even knew about until years later. They started talking about this whole cloning thing. But really, years ago, they had no idea. And I think it was so traumatic and out of the norm in terms of what was reported within one person's experience that they basically just outed Dr. Carla Turner's work and Barbie's because it was just, we could say a little bit about this, but we can't talk about that.
Mhm.
So in his case, it was primarily reptilians and grays, but actually a number of beings that were present, at least in his major experience that I wrote up, where it was like the cloning switching out experience. But that was just part of his experience, which goes on into many more details. But he did have a setup with the quote classic alien love bite when he was 14 years old. So I think that was when he was junior high. Although some people have memories where they were matched even before, like, say, their teenage years. They might be matched earlier, and then in their experiences with somebody that they could be somebody across the country or in another country, and then they would remember and meet them later and then have this sudden love obsession. It kind of activated the memories that they had from being pre-bonded and basically engineered that way. But in Ted's case, there was a clear example he remembered through a hypnotic regression where I believe it was a craft came down. So it was a classic abduction with a craft with beings in his screen memory. He thought the beings were like angels, that they came and took him and another girl that he knew at school named Jill. They went to the same school. And then it was a scenario where he remembered it probably as a dream, but it was more like, I don't know if it was, I think it was actually really physical, and he remembered it as a dream. But he and this young girl, 14-year-old, also were taken together on a craft by what he learned later were grays, and they really weren't angels. And then there was a whole group of people taken. So it was actually a group abduction in his neighborhood that he grew up in. And it could have been in Oklahoma. I don't know the city. But in his memory, when he was regressed, he got more clarity. It was actually a whole group of people that the craft, I think, came over like a junior high school, like a big yard area. And so there was not only him and the 14-year-old and maybe some others around the same age, but there were also other abductees in this joint abduction experience that he saw that were also being matched together. So this wasn't like a singular event of just Ted and his, junior high girlfriend or whatever. Actually, he didn't even like her at the time, but when they joined them together in the abduction, they did a type of a procedure that appeared they used a some kind of candy cane shaped wand that the alien gray manipulated to weave in the heart essence of the girl into Ted's heart essence. So it would be like an energy surgery kind of thing. And then the moment that happened in his experience, he felt as if their souls were joined and felt like complete unconditional love, like obsessive love, because they really did weave in her soul essence in him. So that's why there was such a strong, like telepathic, empathic heart connection with her soul. But they didn't reverse the procedure to put Joel, like his spirit, into hers. So it was like a one-sided love obsession. So it turned out that, he ended up having this love obsession with this girl that he went to school with, but she never liked him back. She, had an alcohol and drug problem. And they ended up getting together later in life, but it turned into like a bad relationship because she had all these addictions and she didn't remember the abductions. Okay, so she wasn't aware of what was going on and acting it out with amnesiac trauma. So this is another thing that happens if you have unrecovered trauma and there's like it doesn't feel right in your subconscious mind or whatever, that will drive the person often towards addictions or outright denial of what was really going on in their secret life.
Hmm.
So this was well documented by Barbie, and so she knew that these things were going on. So it wasn't just a simple love obsession based on a classic puppy love or whatever. This was a real thing that led people to have love obsessions for a long time until they were able to kind of disentangle themselves from the aliens and also from what was going on. They just didn't understand. So long story short, Ted, ended up with this love obsession for quite some time until he figured out that this was an alien engineered scenario that they actually do with a lot of people. So this apparently was a physical abduction. It sounded like it was a physical abduction, but more often than not, it seems like after they get you physically, they can access you in different ways or take you out of the body or pull you into other realities, and it's really weird and then affect you on those levels, all kinds of things, including, who you have a relationship with. So I'm going to stop for a moment if you had another question you'd like to go into, because I don't
No,
want to go
I
on a rant
just like
and miss the
no.
point.
If I ever want to stop you, I'll just interject. Don't worry about that. But like even I was reading Ted's case, and along with Jill, like he also had an encounter with this being called Maya. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And I think we didn't know until years later when people would have these unusual encounters with seemingly non-human people pretending and then appearing in their lives to just kind of, plant the seed or, but it was as if this woman named Maya was like some kind of ET hybrid, fake human or real human. I don't know, because she would like appear and disappear. It was as if they used this woman to guide Ted in his spirituality research because he was very psychically gifted anyway. And he ended up using his abilities in the beginning to help heal. And he was also a channeler in some early New Agey spirituality groups before he actually realized the extent of his alien encounters, which were really, some of them were just like downright nasty reptilian abductions. So, what's interesting, I mean, this is a point that I want to make in many, let's say, mostly New Age spirituality or even paranormal research, whatever. People will want to believe it's something that makes them think they're positive spirit guides, and if you just focus on your spirituality and you do this and that these things will go away, and you'll find out that they're here for our spiritual evolution. That's the whole narrative that people were led to believe. So in his case, when he wanted to share, like, oh, these weird dreams about these aliens, and with the group that he was a spiritual light worker with, like classic channeling or healing, and you hear about this all the time, they were just like, oh, well, no, this is all for your spiritual evolution. Don't talk about the alien abductions. No, that's not negative. And so they kept trying to push off the discovery and the research of what's going on in these encounters and these abductions. So they would try to poo-poo that. And well, let's just be new age light workers. Whatever we're doing is better. No, you're talking about something negative. You shouldn't talk about or anything negative. So it's like a mind control program to avoid the true investigations of what's really happening behind these so-called new agey behaviors. And he was led to do psychic readings and stuff, but the psychics that he talked to, who gave him, they told him like, oh no, you don't need to, explore that's negative, and you really have positive spirit guides. You should focus on that. Well, that turned out to be a lie, led by who are these new age spirit guides? What are they telling them to do? And they're telling them to avoid the investigation of your experiences that have to do with aliens, and saying, oh, well, they're all good. Don't go there. So that's an enabling program run by the beings who even run those psychics. So this is something that Barbie showed and Dr. Carla Turner showed in Ted's case, where, the grandmother was threatened by these reptilians. She knew that when they brought the image of her dead husband who died to try to have sex with her, she was like, no, you guys are the devil. Like, she was like a classic grandmother Christian who said, they're the devil. It was kind of funny because it's true. And so she didn't want to play ball. And then what Ted remembers was like the grandmother being raped by the reptilian, and the reptilian forcing him to have like sex with his grandmother or sex with a reptilian. And so it was a lot of dark, negative, like completely diabolical, perverted crap going on that he remembered in the abductions.
And
But the
what's
reptilians
really
would
interesting
try.
about his grandmother is that she actually resisted it in the beginning, and she was able to send the reptilian away from the room because she called Jesus in. And
Yeah, yeah.
it's after that, like after I think they tried 2 3 times, and then finally she did succumb because I mean, as far
Yeah,
as I understand the case, they implanted her with a thought that they would like give her the ability to be able to reverse people's diseases with herbs and things like
yeah,
that. So there
yeah.
was this kind of subconscious acceptance somewhere.
Yeah. Or they'll give them healing abilities, and you're going to be able to do this and that, and you're going to be an ambassador. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have been told these things. Or, if they just play ball with them, and they'll give them these wonderful abilities, they'll get them on, to get their 15 minutes or whatever amount of time of fame.
Mm.
So, he realized this was a big con job, and the grandmother did end up dying of a sudden heart attack, I think after a major UFO and abduction,
I think it
actually.
was right after the abduction that they both had.
Yeah.
The next day she died, right?
Yeah. So that was a big trauma. And that's probably what led Ted to investigate further. And he knew in his heart and soul there was more behind it that was nefarious and manipulative. But even within his experience, like the major one, I think it happened, there was a tornado that came in his childhood farm. I don't know if it was his grandparents, but a tornado came. And then within that tornado, there was a hidden UFO that was responsible for actually physically taking them and then hiding its activity through like a local tornado, like a storm.
Mm.
So they can do things like that. So in his case, it was definitely a physical event, but not all of them are physical. And that makes it confusing, I think, for people. They want to find evidence, but a lot of times you really can't find physical evidence, but they're interacting with you. So,
In this case also the very important concept of screen memories does come up because throughout his experiences he was under the impression that he was experiencing, like as you said, spirit guides and higher beings and benevolent aliens, but they actually landed up being malevolent beings in disguise. And
yeah,
as far as I understand, he figured that out later on when he went to a hypnotherapist, and then he was able to access the real memories. So for people who aren't aware, these beings actually have the capability to do an abduction, like rape you or
yeah,
like mess with you biologically, and then actually leave behind a screen memory which
mhm,
portrays a good image of what happened, and
yeah.
the actual memory of what happened is behind that. Do you want to elaborate on that like concept and technique a little bit?
Yeah, the whole screen memory thing, that's actually been known by many researchers in the alien abduction field. I think Barbara Bartholick and Carla Turner really, stepped it up a notch in terms of like, "Hey, here's proof." She would go through maybe a layer of the initial memory of an abduction. And this is also elaborated on in my second book called The Dark Side of Cupid, where I was lucky enough to actually publish 3 cases that Barbie had that she gave me. And of course, she passed away, so all her research just, there's nobody who can access it now. So I was lucky to get several cases of hers that demonstrated the screen memory thing, like a major abduction, where the initial memories. I'll just give you an example. It's in my book. I think it's called Mariah and the Spirit Guide. That's the name of the case history story in The Dark Side of Cupid, which is very similar to orchestrated relationships and love obsessions and that kind of thing. But in the Mary, well, we call her Mary Henry. That was her real name. She's deceased now, so I can speak. Had many UFO encounters, like the classic abductions that you would hear about, where she was on her way to work. I think she worked at a Catholic school in some capacity. I don't remember her position. It must have been a daytime job or whatever the hours were. She would go to work and drive every day, but on one particular day, she was taken, and I think she had at least an hour and a half of missing time. so that when she came into work, she was like 2 hours late. And so, well, but her coworkers and her boss didn't say anything. Like, that's a big deal. Like, if you're late for work for 2 hours, somebody's like, hey, you're late, you know? But it was as if nobody even noticed that she was late. But on her way home, she was still in amnesia of what happened during the missing time. She noticed in her hands, like she had like bad arthritis in her hands. But she noticed, like, wow, my hands, they were healed like of arthritis, like after this encounter, this abduction. So she felt like, well, it must have been good. These beings like helped heal my hands. So she had an initial regression by another psychiatrist where there was some events popped up in her memory, which was the first layer, and meeting beings who had these weird, it was very strange, as if they were wearing like a skull cap with a widow's peak hairline. And they see some of them were like blonde Nordics who were good looking, that she didn't feel any fear. They did this medical thing and told her over time that she would be an ambassador as a ET emissary for them, and that the world's going to end, the earth is going to blow up, the sun's going to get too hot, but you need to save people and you need to be our emissary. And so she thought, oh, well, this is good, these beings are good, they healed my hands. And so when she did further regressions to find out what happened, because things were getting weird and incongruent with what these messages from these beings were, so she went deeper in the regression with Barbie, who did many regressions, and found out that these beings were basically doing a con job. And they got her involved. She actually got involved with channeling, where she was doing, at first, she was doing automatic writing that she thought were maybe like these ET beings that she wanted to connect with because she thought they were good. And then she started doing this channeling where it was really bizarre. Though this happens, right? When people get into channeling and maybe being a medium, or
Hmm.
I think she was doing automatic writing. But the being that came through was actually a reptilian imposter. Okay, in hindsight, was this country music western singer named Jim Reeves. Okay, some old country western, probably from the '60s, was this woman's favorite singer. So she would play the guitar, and it was like he would be channeled through her playing the music and giving her all these messages, and it was like a love affair with this dead country singer who died, and it was like a sexual energy, and like she was having this love affair with this being that she was channeling. But as it progressed over time, the the channeled messages got more and more, I don't know, convoluted towards this alien group, and the group that had these like widow's peak hairline, and it turned into kind of like this whole demonic thing. And it's all in my book, by the way. It's in that case study. The whole story was unfolded as a type of infiltration by these dark beings playing ET or playing dead, country stars, in order to basically use her as a tool of possession. They tried to possess her, and basically like V2K voices of, at first they'd be positive, and then it just got like a cacophony of many demonic voices basically in her head, trying to drive her to literally pour hot coffee over her kids. And that's at the point where she was like, oh my God, this is like some kind of demonic thing. And she had to call a priest so that, she wouldn't like harm her kids. So she ended up calling, like, I think it was a Catholic priest. And I don't even think they did a exorcism. I think they felt like they couldn't do nothing. And, something else happened where she went to a psychological inpatient facility for people who had like a psychotic break. But it really wasn't a psychotic break. It was like the demonic infestation was getting so strong that basically she was going to be destroyed or be possessed. So anyway,
Yeah.
she did get better, and did many hypnotic regressions and conversations with Barbie to kind of figure out what really happened there. And she definitely had real alien abductions encounters physically, but it kind of got all infiltrated by these dark forces. So, and it was the layers of screen memories that she discovered later were not the same as what she initially remembered with, oh, these beings, they healed my hands. I felt no fear. I thought they were, it was almost a romantic attraction towards these Nordic beings who popped up in her experience, but they really weren't. I think they were really reptilians in disguise. And that's what Barbie showed, as she had this case unfold and all the memories she came to. understand that this was like a big manipulation that, almost cost her life or her harming her kids. Yeah. So, and then she was in a love obsession also that these beings were doing with her, except they did it with this spirit guide entity as opposed. And then she had another love bite set up in real life with another man, actually, even after that experience that Barbie investigated. So it was as if these beings decided, okay, we're gonna give you a little positive thing now since you did so much for us. Then she had a real love bite, like affair with someone else who wasn't her husband in life, and it was so long and convoluted how they interfere and the depth of it. But this is what Barbie was able to show within one case study. She was able to show not only classic alien abduction types of things like, they're taking your eggs and you medical exam and the weird things, but the whole underbelly of what was working behind that and the hidden memories of what was going on in abductions. And I've heard this from others, not just Barbie's cases, but people that I know and have interviewed who initially they wanted to go along with the positive peer pressure of this ET space brother, they're here for our spiritual evolution story, and then find out that some of the screen memories of some of the positive things that they would leave you with so you wouldn't remember what happened underneath were actually bullshit. But they kept trying to infuse a positive spin and a peer pressure to only want to talk about the positive things and the negative ET things. Well, that's really the military. That's the kind of stuff that,
Mhm.
Stephen Greer would try to impose. If someone had a negative reptilian thing, they'd be like, well, that's just all human military faking negative things so that we will have a particular perception of the aliens. But in reality, there's probably many different kinds of beings that run a spectrum of behaviors. But if you look at the fruit on the tree over time, you will start to see the underbelly that if they are of a dark side or they are deceivers, it will be shown over time in someone's lifetime. But you have to really
So
follow it.
yeah, uh, over lifetime is too long for someone to actually go through that torture and then realize, and that might be necessary for us to learn discernment in our lives. As a lot of people who have experienced this phenomena, they'll end up
Yeah,
becoming more intelligent, more discerning of spiritual realities. But and as far as your analysis of the case studies go that you have accumulated on alien interference, what would you say are some of the common characteristics? Like you were mentioning that in Ted's case, they actually set it up one way since the beginning, that he actually
yeah,
was obsessed with her because her energies were transferred into him, but it didn't happen the other way around. But in many cases,
yeah,
I've seen that actually both people are set up in the beginning and
yeah,
then one person is turned off, which actually like
yes,
adds to a lot of torment and anguish for the other
yeah,
person, because it felt like a soulmate twin flame thing in the beginning, and they have these dreams that are set up with the partner that this the
yeah.
entities are trying to get them set up with, and then after a while it's like the other person just drops out of it. So
Yeah. Or that what Barbie used to call it, oh, when they did the switch off and the psychic unplugging. And then there are some cases in my book or and people that I spoke to personally who remember there was some kind of event or an abduction that happened, um, like on a camping trip, for example, and then something happened where all of a sudden their spouse doesn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. They were abducted and basically turned away from that abductee, or something would happen where they seem to have things going like a mutual love interest, and then one person being switched off and then being able to connect that with, well, an event happened where the aliens came and they basically switched them off or unplugged them and basically turned off the obsession on one side but left the other one pining away in unrequited love. And it was those emotions of like yearning and obsession and sadness and all those things that Barbara Bartholic said that they're like loose feeding and creating these high drama emotional experiences to, I think, feed on the emotional energy. And some people may say, oh, well, they're just doing a scientific experiment as these alien beings. They want to see what makes us tick, and they'd be able to put us through all these different experiences to see what happens. And in my view, it's not just a scientific project that these beings are doing to study humans. They've been harvesting them for friggin' thousands of years and doing this crap. And I think it goes beyond science. It goes
Mm.
beyond, we are a resource of supply for them, and they want to keep that farm going. And so it's not just negative emotions, though. Although the reptilians in particular, they tend to go for the lower spectrum of emotional energy.
Mm.
But in reality, there's other beings who will also feed on, the love and the worship and other emotions, like, the love in our heart. So it's not all negative emotions, but it is life force. It is sexual energy, and it is emotional energy that seems to, feed these beings or they have great interest in keeping that going. So I
Great.
don't know
So,
if I went off topic there.
no, no, you're exactly on point. So, in your experience, how can someone differentiate an alien love bite from more of a demonic thing, compared to like just not aliens, but demons and hyperdimensional beings trying to interfere? And how would that contrast to a normal relationship? Because I don't want like people
Mm,
watching this to confuse just normal relationship psychology issues and try to put
yeah,
everything like, oh, I'm being manipulated by aliens.
yeah.
So maybe if you can just highlight the characteristic differences between these three categories,
Okay.
and then we can go into methods of self defense as well, because I don't want
Yeah,
people like leaving with the
yeah,
impression that we're hostage
yeah,
to these beings and we're victims of whatever they're doing. So yeah.
yeah. There's a difference. And in my first book, The Love Bite, it focused more on the extraterrestrial alien component of how they were interacting in that person's life with abductions, encounters, and orchestrated relationships, or interfering to prevent some relationships from happening. And it seemed to be clear with their observation and witness testimony of what they remember that this was definitely quote, related to the aliens. Okay, so there's alien behaviors which border on, for lack of a better term, sometimes demonic and very negative in terms of what they can do and their reaction to the person's experience, how they perceive it. So in my second book, The Dark Side of Cupid, I go into other case histories where they felt there was like definitely a orchestration where the person seemed to be a twin flame, or they were set up with this partner, but these people didn't necessarily have alien abduction or ET encounter histories. And so this is where some people feel that they are set up with, let's say, a love, I don't know, love affair. Sometimes it's actually a superstar, like a musician or an actor or someone across the world who has a, let's say, a light worker guru or whatever, and then they will have these obsessive feelings for them, and then have these astral and dream experiences
Mm.
related to connecting with a particular person that may or may not be an abductee, but it's as if it's engineered by beings who function on hyperdimensional levels or technology to do the same kind of thing. So I showed this in The Dark Side of Cupid, for example, where the couple was, I think it was just someone who was a channeler, and the beings that she channeled would take center stage in that person's life, and then the one that she was set up with, as if they were a special couple, who were living out this high drama, a myth drama of, epic biblical proportions of the importance of Isis and Osiris and the Tammuz and the other one. They would be like these mythical dramas being played out. But the beings who were doing this weren't necessarily ETs or aliens or taking that form, but they often were interacting as a spirit guide or a being of light, or some kind of influence on that level. But some people can have these kinds of obsessions being run by what appear to be hyperdimensional or even demonics, depending on their family system. So a lot of times it's a spirit guide. For example, I had someone report to me, it's probably in an article somewhere, where it was I don't know, one of these psychic healer who find your guardian angel, and find your twin flame through working through this person who's like a psychic channel who could call upon her spirit guides to help you find your twin flame. And then doing these like psychic sessions with people who, oh, I want to find my angel guard to send me to my twin flame. And there's somebody that they like. And can they get help with this psychic who has, guardian angels or whatever to help them have a set up with her twin flame. And so one of the women who reported this to me, she had kind of like a crush on a guy, or wanted to have a twin flame. So she went to this psychic woman. I don't know who it is. I won't name names. Who would help, go into this trancey psychic state to talk with her spirit guides, and then ask the spirit guides to bring that person their twin flame. So this woman who reported it to me ended up having this like very lucid dream, or a astral experience, where she saw in her dream that the psychic who was helping her was calling on these beings to open a portal and connect with the woman to find her twin flame. And so she saw this all in like an astral dreamscape thing, where like a portal opened up, and then the psychic's like influencing in the dream so she could perceive her presence as that woman who was like the guide. And then a portal opening up in the dream, and the twin flame person coming through it, but there was like a reptilian in the same experience. And so when she got together with this alleged twin flame, who was basically run by this hyperdimensional reptilian, and this woman who was a psychic and her spirit guides, come to find out it was all engineered by these beings who set up this complete twin flamey thing with
Mm.
somebody who was influenced by the reptilian, whoever that hierarchical being was, to
Damn.
completely loose feed on the dynamic, which when it plays out on a psychological level, it plays out like the classic narcissist, right? The
Mm.
narcissistic abuse, where you fall for like a personality profile that acts very narcissistic, but really they're being manipulated by these dark forces, because it's easy to manipulate somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder, or maybe they're hosted, right?
Mm.
So these kinds of things would happen. They were like, well, I don't have any UFO sightings, but I had this relationship and had like the same dynamic, and they were interfering in my dreams, and they were so connected that they could like literally like see in their third eye and feel what they're experiencing, like a complete plugging in psychically of another person. Or the beings who are tweaking the knobs in this other level to put people together and create these, dramas and chaos, and, switching off. So that can happen in another way, where the aliens aren't even part of the story, that it's another type of being, but it's doing the same kind of thing. They seem to be feeding on the emotions of this whole love obsession drama, under the guise of, well, we'll set you up with your twin flame, and then it turns out to be like one of these like fake things, right?
Mm.
It's run by these diabolical entities who are loose feeding on the drama, and it sets people off in like a whole deviated timeline. And I remember Carissa and Tom Montauk talking about this on the panel, where I think it was Carissa actually, where she was doing some classic kind of new age. Oh, I'm going to set my intentions and light a candle, and I'm going to call in my twin flame, the one who's meant for me, and they're looking for their love interest, right? And then something happens, like it's a miracle, and these synchronicities happen, and now pretty soon they're like, this person enters their life, and they have a crush on them, and there's this like lovey-dovey thing going on. But then it turns out to be like diabolical, and more shit's happening, paranormal activity, and then they have more abductions during the process of the love setup, which
Mm.
shows you that there's these beings interfering to try to loose feed or manipulate this whole relationship. So that's what Carissa, found out later, that, if you start messing around with, maybe it's like witchcraft, or they think it's like positive intentions with whatever spin their spiritual belief is, but it can open the window and the doorway for these beings to come through and really mess with us, because we're not clear in our discernment
Mm.
of what's really happening on these subtle levels of reality. And so that's the reason why I wrote my books. Like, wow, how can we discern if this is just a regular relationship thingy, or there's really beings involved? So the paranormal activity and the supernatural thing and the synchronistic events appear to be a type of red flag, although I will not say that all 100% of these things are bad twin flame fake things. Some
Mm.
of them really are good, and you really do have a connection, and you actually remember. Sometimes you remember a past life connection with someone, and that's why you have such a strong soul connection to them that could explain the attraction.
Mm.
But it only happens like if that person realizes over time, they start remembering other lifetimes, they may remember their experiences, then they'll be able to put the thing together and actually realize the whole situation. But I think there's much more going on that we're not aware of, that we only find out in hindsight through, deep dives in our personal shadow work and becoming more spiritually attuned, by applying really virtues and cultivation techniques, maybe meditation, or being more sensitive and aware, uh, cleaning out your energy body every day, and finding that there are influences that we could be, victims of if we're not careful. So I don't know if I explained it, but there are like standard psychological explanations for something that would be like a love obsession within a narcissistic personality style that someone gets attracted to. And they're the classic, like, codependent empath who's
Mhm.
attracted to this
Bad boy.
charismatic person
Yeah.
who's like the narcissist personality style, run by an entity. Usually they are run by entities, because there's many psychics who, they see it. I
Mm.
mean, they see the person, they had like this entity running around, and they could actually perceive that these people are run by these entities. And so that's shown in my book also, where it's like the whole overshadowing was completely observed. And it may or may not be a reptilian or a, lizard type. It could be other um, beings that they see clairvoyantly in a different way. So if that answers the question,
It does, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I'd like you to elaborate on is how can people differentiate between genuine positive spiritual influences compared to negative beings posing as positive ones? Because both in like alien interference as well as in demonic beings interfering, there's a common pattern of these beings trying to project themselves as either they're here to help us or heal us, or they're trying to pander to our ego and make us out to be this person who's going to represent them. So
Yeah, yeah.
in your whole research, I'm sure you believe that there are genuine higher positive influences that also work through synchronicity and dreams. So
Yeah.
how can people navigate differentiating between manipulation and like genuine spiritual connections?
Um, well, in my case, I mean, I had to learn the hard way, that if I have, oh, how can I say it? Our discernment will be better if we recover from our own traumas and unresolved issues, even
Mm,
from, let's say, regular family stuff, and alien, if there's alien stuff, to try to do as much healing work and what we call personal shadow work, or
yeah.
cultivating calmness and awareness and balance in our life with what I'm calling virtue. Virtue means essential goodness, and the desire to want to be and express essential goodness in our lives. So it comes to the question of good and evil. Sometimes, like, if someone doesn't really have goodness in their heart and their intentions, they tend to be more manipulated by dark forces in general. So I guess I believe our discernment happens as we do our own recovery work and greater awareness and sensitivity and essential goodness. That means cultivating spiritual um, goodness, the merit, the virtues, whatever. Then you can start to perceive, as we purify ourselves actually and work through our traumas, then we can perceive more clearly what is happening in and around us, even in our astral dreamscape, so that you just know how it feels, and your spirit actually shows you what truth is when we are connected with divine goodness. But if there's unresolved trauma and a lot of chaos in your life, and you were raised like in a family system where there was abuse and whatever, or abductions, a lot of times that causes us to be more vulnerable to manipulation by nefarious people or aliens. So to have discernment is very important, so that you could go around the problem, basically, because you see it coming and you feel it and you know it. Uh, that only, I think, we learn in hindsight. Um, but there are things that happen naturally under normal psychological explanations, where we might have, a personality style that tends to be attracted to, like, okay, the bad boy, right? Or the charismatic rock star, or whatever it is. That sometimes those personality types, they have a complementary attraction that's very strong, and may play out a lot of high drama emotional stuff, and then end up failing. And that would be a classical narcissist empath codependent relationship duo. Often
Mm.
plays out this kind of, you know, an immediate like love obsession, but then it basically turns negative over time because of the triggering of unresolved trauma and the personality types that are being attracted magnetically in a complement. In fact, there's a therapist who's well known who talks about this in the US. His name is Ross Rosenberg, and he wrote a book called the Human Magnet Syndrome and the recovery of how you can recover from one of these like completely devastating narcissist abused relationships. So what happens to people, the people who report it and go to therapy because they're hurting so bad, are usually the ones who are the good guy, right? They were empathic. They had maybe a more of a codependent style of behaving in psychological terms. And then they may have ended up with like a really bad relationship that had strong qualities of narcissistic abuse, and the dramatic cycle that occurs. And this doesn't even have to do with aliens, right? It would be the initial love bombing and the initial, strong connection, and then there will be a phase of after the love obsession. There's going to be a devaluation quality of the narcissist, making that person feel shitty about themselves, or they would gaslight them or just play manipulative games of it's kind of like I don't know, love hate, dangling the carrot. Kind of
Mhm.
they keep you hanging on to this carrot, but then they drop you off and they won't respond mutually in a relationship. So it's like love bombing, devaluation, and discard are the three main qualities of the dynamic of a narcissist in a relationship. They love bomb you at first, you feel real connected. Oh yeah, I agree, I'm just like that. And then over time they just kind of loose feed you because they want all that love and attention. But then over time, they will devalue and discard you because it's their personality style to avoid any kind of intimacy that gets them to the root core shame of the shit they never dealt with in their trauma childhood. And so it will compel them to do the love bombing, devaluation, discard over and over and over again, which is actually classic in a lot of these, when they call it the twin flame dynamic of the runner, right? Oh, he's my twin flame, but he's the runner right now. And it's this game of, oh, love obsession, where the empath, gives them their all, this, and then the other partner is just like basically blowing them off and using them as a source of emotional supply or sexual supply. So that happens like even in normal life with certain relationship dynamics of the classical narcissist. Sometimes a borderline personality can act that way too, with somebody who's more empathic and kind and just doesn't realize they're being taken for a ride and being abused, really. So that can happen just like in normal relationships. And that dynamic of the narcissistic abuse is very similar to a classic alien love bite setup where all of a sudden, the juices are flowing. They have a mutual connection of like complete telepathic connection. It's like your souls are joined, literally. And then something happens where it's switched off. And the one who's playing the narcissistic end personality style, they lose interest or they switch off to, they just don't care. And it's how they respond and react in relationships due to their own unhealthy stuff. But that happens a lot, and then people will think, oh, it's an alien love bite. And it's really not. So the alien love bite, you're going to have evidence. You're going to have circumstantial, like multiple UFO sightings, stuff going on in your family line, entity visitations, the classic missing time or the medical
Mm.
things. You wake up with body marks. You have a missing pregnancy where it's, like there's too much showing there's alien interference. So that's where there's more alien stuff going on. And some people never have the events like alien abductions, but they may be set up and have the whole relationship dynamic that shows it's actually much more than a human magnet syndrome, like Ross Rosenberg says, and quote, the normals who don't know about the weird shit and the aliens and the demonic shit. They'll look at it from a simply psychological perspective of attachment trauma, relationship styles. And that's
Mm.
relevant, but it's not the whole ball of wax, because
You
there
can't
is a
explain every case with that. I mean, there are some cases
yeah.
that, like, you can say it's just normal dynamics of different narcissism and codependency styles, but then with so much evidence about like demonic interference and alien interference, I mean, they're just doing a big disservice to society by, not letting people know that there's much more to the story in many cases than meets the eye.
Yes. And this kind of goes into, I think, the reason why I was so motivated to talk about this. It was like, ufology's dirty little secret. They wanted to keep all this nuts and bolts scientific investigation credible, with just science, and many, scientific minded people who want to dominate, like, what aliens are, what UFOs are, what ET encounters are, what abductions are. They tend to not value the importance of relationship dynamics, and the realm that a lot of, I will say, as a woman, we're very interested in relationships. We are about relationships and connecting, and that whole quality of what we feel is really important in life, like
Mm.
marriage and family and relationships, are very important for women in general. We're going to talk about it more. We'll want to talk about our relationship stuff more. We just tend to value that quality of life. Whereas if someone wants to take a strictly scientific investigation, they're going to marginalize that whole thing. And this is what Barbara Bartholick taught me, as well as Carla Turner, that, wait a minute here, there's a big part of our lives that are being interfered with, that have great value in being able to talk about and make important. But emotional well-being, emotional intelligence, relationships are basically marginalized to be, well, they're really not that important. That's not true science. We're going to investigate something else. And when they do that, when they devalue the importance of this whole aspect of life, they won't see the whole picture, and they will be used to spin a narrative that basically keeps them enslaved in this control system. So I believe that the whole relationship thing is very important, and it's a big part of who we are. And it needs to be included in, when we lay down all the cards on the table of the quote ET disclosure, UFO disclosure, we need to lay out everything on the line in terms of people's experiences and value that. But when it's not valued because they think it's not important, they're following into the hands of the controllers to continue using us as a resource. So this is why we do need to speak up about these things and include the whole ball of wax. And that's what Barbie taught me, is that, you don't just, cherry pick the data like a, you know, political, what do they call it? Mockingbird media, whatever.
Mhm.
They're cherry picking the data. They're cherry
Yeah.
picking what we disclose to make it what they want us to think it is, so that the real predators who are acting behind these images of different kinds of beings can continue to use Earth humans as a resource. And this is my biggest, argument of great importance to the entire human species, that we need to value every single quality of our experience and find out what's going on behind the scenes that might be using us as a resource. We're not the highest thing on the food chain, as they say, but it's not just physical. I think it's spiritual and emotional. And then there's this whole other area that I feel very strongly about now in my work. I don't really work so much with UFO abductions or alien abductions anymore, because to me, the most important thing to regain our sovereignty on all levels is trauma recovery from a strictly psychological, right, emotional intelligence perspective, and also a spiritual sovereignty perspective of truly understanding who we are spiritually, in order to fully grasp and understand who these other beings are that are doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I
And
was
this is
actually going to mention that if someone's watching this and they just see the solutions you're proposing to all of these things, ultimately, whether it's to fight alien, and I wouldn't even say fight. I mean, whether it's to transcend alien interference or hyperdimensional interference or just general relationship stuff, it all
yeah.
ultimately boils down to the same thing, which is doing inner work. Like once we start doing that and resolving our unhealed aspects and shadow aspects and integrating all of that, then we kind of become immune to more and more deception and manipulation. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the basic logic. And I would agree that the more we do our own, we take responsibility where we can to do our healing work, to do our spiritual cultivation work of realization of our eternal spiritual nature, which is above and beyond these body avatar incarnation vehicles. And that will help us. Although I have run into people, and I don't want to use this to encourage victim thinking, but in hindsight, many have discovered that, well, I've done a lot of shadow work, I've done my prayer and I've done this and that, and then I'm still being interfered with. Or they find that, like, once they may have done a whistleblowing in areas where somebody at a high level doesn't want you talking about, that person can end up being what I call the targeted individual, where they're having reprisals on multiple levels, maybe sometimes from aliens or even humans or alphabet soup agencies or human groups who have access to technologies to affect us on these other levels. So we can't say that if we all do our homework and do our spiritual work, that everything's going to be okay. We're talking about a collective here in this realm on this earth that has been under an influence and principalities that have a higher level of influence and authority over us small lives. So there is something bigger. I believe there's things we can do, but I'm not going to say it's 100%,
Hmm.
because I think there is a divine power. And some people call it God or Christ or, the Tao. That there is something benevolent and much greater than ourselves that we can connect with to work within the flow of that supernatural power of ultimate divine goodness, to talk combat these other darker forces that have been messing with us for a very, very long time here. So, in general, yes, I will agree with you that we do with our shadow work and spiritual cultivation with virtue. It generally protects us, but in I can't say that happens with many cases. Some people really are targeted. Some people really were murdered as a
Hmm.
result of their disclosures, and they're on the front lines. So, because there is a war going on.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like even Montauk really explains it well, that there's, pre-incarnational agreements and a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that, doesn't necessarily meet the eye. Even with people who do get taken out, a lot of them, have signed agreements and stuff that they later land up violating. So of course, there's many factors that play into someone being targeted and taken out, and methods of self-defense. But one, technique that I've heard you talk about recently with respect to, defense against these antics is dream work and lucid dreaming. Do you want to
Yeah, yeah,
elaborate on that a little bit before we like finally close off?
yeah. That's fantastic. I'm glad you asked. Um, I had been Actually, I started doing lucid dreaming. I did this all through my life, but I decided to emphasize, if we can remember our dreams, or dream journal, do intentions before we go to bed with like prayers and intentions, so that our spirit, actually our higher self, if you want to call it, and God, can actually start communicating and working in our dreams to show us truth. Oftentimes it's symbolic, but there was a woman that I interviewed for, must be over 12 years now, a Scandinavian woman named Marit. And it was a progress showing her discovery of alien abductions and how they were interfering and accessing on different levels of reality, and how she eventually stopped abductions by doing integrative work of, really the alter personalities, and with the parts of you that are maybe compartmentalized spiritually. So she did this over time, and we did many interviews. But the final leg of the work that created the success in regaining sovereignty, where your higher self can really come in and completely change things, or God and a higher power, was as over time, she would watch her dreams and how these aliens were maybe interfering on other subtle levels. And she noticed that certain symbols and root word meanings, like etymology and archetypes and symbols, would appear in her dreams, and her spirit would actually start showing her truth of what was going on in her life with respect to the aliens and the hyperdimensional interference. And so she just started observing the root archetypal symbols, and especially etymology, that seemed to help her decode her dreams. And then, so when the aliens would come, she would perceive how they would enter into her physical reality and sometimes into dreams. And so she was able to finally stop it and basically command with her higher self the removal and of these influences. And so it will happen on more and more subtle levels of awareness. But the lucid dreaming really helped her eradicate their level of manipulation. So they would
Mhm.
like try to program our dreams or program us in another state of consciousness, and that you only know once you get lucid, like in your dreams, enough to start seeing all the different ways they're interacting with us or influencing. But our higher self and God, or whatever you want to call it, can also show us truth in our dreams and in our perceptions so that we can override the what I call they try to override our consciousness with their agenda and their thinking and their narratives, which this is something Dr. Corrado Malanga of Italy, he's a researcher, PhD organic chemistry, did these alien abduction research for years, and then came to understand, like the malevolent aliens anyway, what they're really doing to us and how they're inserting their will through us by using our, let's say, our spiritual battery to empower their agenda and their consciousness and their mind program. And it would happen sometimes, it would show up archetypically in dreams where you would start to see, oh, this is the alien program, this is the implant, this is the watcher popping up in my dreams, and now I can see what they're doing and how they're trying to influence my reality. And so this is what can be done in lucid dreams. You just become aware in your dream. Sometimes you just observe it, you don't have to control it, but oftentimes you can control what they're doing if they are interfering. Like you could wake up from the dream and stop them from pulling you out of your body, or commanding them to stop in the name of Jesus, or sometimes your own oversoul knows and basically says no and stops the agreement, and they no longer can access on that level. So I would say dreaming is definitely a good way of getting deeper into finding out how they're influencing and commanding them to leave, so that you're only left with your own consciousness and your own spirit driving revelation of truth and power in your life. So
Great.
getting loose is absolutely essential.
Awesome. And I want you to leave people with some hope. So I know that you also work with a lot of people who've gone through these things, and you have insights to share with respect to how much time it takes for people to recover after they've been through situations like these. So what's your general outlook with respect to someone who's been through, interference on any of these levels and is trying to make their way back through grief of losing someone, or just like relationships ending, divorces and stuff like that? Like, how much time in your experience does it take someone to heal? Is healing possible for more difficult kind of scenarios? What have you seen in your experience working with people directly?
I think what people have are very resilient. And I have to say, I've met people who've gone through some of the most horrendous childhoods or, trauma. And then they come out doing fine and they end up having okay relationships. And then there's some who have great difficulty in recovering from the complex trauma and the anomalous trauma to be able to feel like they can have a good relationship where their partner or them are not being messed with. So it depends on the person. I believe we can do this. We could definitely do this by, I believe it's loving care, really. It boils down to like how much love and concern and caring you can have in your life, and to feel safe to just express yourself as you are and how you're experiencing things. If we have people in our lives who actually love and care for us, we can get through this. And I think that love is absolutely the most important thing for us to have, to be able to share openly without ridicule, without smear campaigning, and being made to be wrong. If we have just enough of that in our life, it could just turn things around. So I don't believe we should have to be, some kind of spiritual ascetic on a path forever to get love in our life. I think we can recover. And certainly Bernard and his partner have demonstrated like phenomenal shadow work for
Mhm.
people, as well as Tom Montauk. He got through this at a young age. Like he was a young man. He was just like I remember him from the early 2000s, and I was just floored with his wisdom and his strength and his awareness of like a young man really just like getting it, you know? So I believe people can get this and they can work through this. But as a psychologist, I think that understanding trauma and emotional intelligence and true relationship dynamics in a healthy way for a family system and for a relationship, a certain level of education on, well, what is that? What does it really look like to have a healthy relationship and to really honor whatever that is so that you can be that in your life? So we can definitely overcome. And the biggest, I would say, factor against that would be if we do not listen to our emotional intelligence and our heart and the spirit of truth that speaks through our eternal spirit, whose focus is essential goodness and truth, then we can overcome all things, I believe. But if someone doesn't have good intentions, they're just kind of like a selfish person, or they're just like completely like influenced by dark greed and power, well, that ain't going to work for them. And you don't want to be in a relationship with someone like that unless you want to be
Mm.
abused. So you have to really decide what you want in your life and what you don't want, so that we set boundaries against the things that we feel this is just not healthy. And we just connect with those who are willing to listen and honor us for who we are. And so we don't have to pretend we're something else. I mean, many of us who grew up this way, we had to hold a lot of secrets. And even now, like, there's some things that are okay to share, and other things nobody wants us to talk about, even on YouTube. Even now, with all these people coming out, there's certain things that it's like taboo. You don't talk about this. So it's a process. But I believe we can overcome this. Absolutely.
Awesome, Vivi. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us so much of your time. I'm sure people got a lot of insight from this last 1.5 hour. I would really recommend people who want to get deeper into the subject and gain a better understanding. Evie has two brilliant books, The Dark Side of Cupid and The Love Bite. Please go read them because it's like packed with case studies of evidence of these things. Plus, it doesn't leave you like in despair or fear, but there's actual, spiritual empowerment and solutions in those books as well to counteract this. I also really recommend going out and checking out the panel that you did with Tom and
Oh,
Carissa and
yeah.
Bernard, because those two panels, I think there's one on hyperdimensional interference and then one on the
Yeah.
love bite. So both of those were extremely like jam packed with practical, valuable stuff with respect to discernment and
Yeah.
solutions and characteristics. So yeah, just thank you so much for coming and giving us so much of your time. It was a pleasure speaking to you today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, Evie. Take care. Bye
Alrighty.
bye.